All right, and welcome everyone to the Ginette Biro Podcast. I'm Ginette Biro, and I'm very thrilled to be here with a very special guest, and we are going to dive into the world of shadow work. And I'm very excited about this because I think so much has come up because of the pandemic about shadow work. So we're going to dive into that. But first, you need to know a little bit about this wonderful lady. Jade Izon is a meditation teacher, an ART empowerment guide. Her training is primarily in mental health and wellness. She offers neuro-linguistic programming and is trained in de-escalation and immediate intervention of individuals in a mental health crisis. I find that fantastic. Her career in facilitating really began about trauma and recovery and creating resiliency in adversity. And that was all after learning how to heal from her own childhood story. And so really her main goal in life on this planet is to assist others in their journey through shadow work, self-care, and learning how to cultivate deeper love and empowerment with themselves. Wow, that's amazing. And I gotta say, she has a whole list of many other titles behind her name. So this is a well-educated, well-read, well-practiced lady. So thank you for being on the show, Jade.
Thank you so much for having me. It's lovely to be here.
Yeah, this is great. And like I said, I think this is such a perfect time to have this conversation because we're kind of nearing, we are in the midst of being totally fatigued by the pandemic, but also potentially nearing a shift and a movement out of it. I'm saying that very cautiously. But what a lot of people are finding is the pandemic really pushed them over this waterfall that I've talked about in a lot of podcasts into their shadow work, right? And some people knew they had shadow work to do, but then there was others that didn't know they had to do it. And they found themselves in the waterfall and like totally in a muck. So there's a lot of people that are just really kind of whirling around in these waters right now. And yeah, tell us a little bit about shadow work. Let's start there. For those that are like, what is shadow work? Let's just start there.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. So shadow work originally was actually coined by Carl Jung, who was a psychoanalyst and founding father in psychology. He's really best known for his work with Freud. He stated that the shadow be the unknown dark side of the personality, the part that's instinctive and irrational and is prone to psychological projection. So basically, it's a perceived personal inferiority and is recognized as some sort of a moral deficiency in someone else, meaning that whatever negative thing you see in another, a quality you don't like, is merely just a projection of a quality within yourself that you have yet to resolve. And these mirrors show up as reflections of our projections and triggers. Expanding on that, which I do love that, I prefer to define shadow work as the cultivation of self-awareness, that everything in our outer world is a reflection of our inner world. And so a mirror still, but this doesn't mean that everything that you dislike in another person that you'll find as a personal quality within yourself, but rather an unresolved aspect within the self, which is asking to be addressed and healed. Yeah, so, sometimes you look at somebody and you're like, ooh, I don't like that thing. You can ask yourself, is this a quality or is this something that I've done? Why is this triggering me? Why is this mirroring for me? And sometimes it also can be something from, the way you were treated by somebody, right? Somebody in your childhood or a role model or, as you were growing, whatever, it was maybe a negative experience and you're seeing that and it's triggering you and going, ooh, you know what? That was the thing that really, really hurt me. So, not necessarily is everything that you see in someone else something that is, a quality within yourself. And I feel that is often exploited a little bit with people when they're, like, oh, you see this in me? Well, that's obviously something inside of you.
Yeah, right.
Sometimes you just kind of treated somebody like crap and they're, it's kind of how it showed up for them. Yeah. So that's my personal definition or expansion of the definition in shadow work.
Yeah.
And the reason why shadow work is so incredibly important is really, these are the places inside ourselves that need more love, right? These are the places inside of ourselves that just need more nurturing, more care. And these are often the places that show up as rejection and judgment and shame and guilt. And those things carry a really heavy density inside the body, inside the spirit. It really actually physically just holds on in the body. And it really prevents us from expanding and creating space for new things. Now, that's not to say that everything that comes up is going to be something that you're going to, feel great about, and that, we have all this bypassing of like just positive washing all of the experiences in which, feel hard for us. Mm-hmm. But at least integrating them enough and continuing to integrate them and do the work around them so that you can feel in flow with yourself. You can cultivate the resiliency, the awareness around how you interact with your shadow. What is the voice of your shadow? And how is it subconsciously ruling your life? How can you take that power back, learn to dance with the shadows rather, and actually move in your life in more unity? Mm-hmm. So, it's very empowering to be able to shift into that space, to be able to recognize those places and mm-hmm. begin to work with them and begin to take accountability for them. Right.
Yeah. That's such a big part. Hey, that accountability and that awareness in the first place. Cause like, there's a lot of people that, aren't even aware, right? Like they have no concept or awareness of that mirror, or of the fact that things are being reflected back at them for them to shift and change, right? It's a very interesting thing. And I think there's a group of people that really understand this language and this idea, but then there's still a group that like, it's so foreign, right? Like you see shadow work and they just are like, what? Or projections and mirroring and reflections. And they're like, what is that? Right. And so we're living through this balancing of scales, or two sides of polarity in humanity right now, of like awareness and not so much awareness. And it's interesting to see how it's kind of like almost creating this divide, but I really feel like the divide's going to merge back together at some point.
Well, I mean, that's kind of the key basis, right? We want to work ourselves back into a space of unity where these things are kind of working in a good relationship, where you have, the pieces of one and the other, right? That mm-hmm. gateway between the yin and the yang. But the thing is that a lot of people go, how can you not be aware? Or like, why aren't you aware? And you have a lot of people who are waking up and cultivating or have cultivated that self-awareness. Mm-hmm. Where you see that reflecting as judgment in those who aren't doing that work or aren't really aware of their shadows, right? And there's frustration around that because, of course, they're taking the accountability and it feels like other people aren't. But we have to understand that we've been grown up in in generations, right? And a society that hasn't encouraged that, right? It hasn't encouraged vulnerability. Vulnerability is a huge piece in doing shadow work. You have to be vulnerable mm-hmm. with yourself. You also have to be willing to admit that, hey, this is a thing for me, right? This is mm-hmm. a thing. And that's really difficult for people to do with themselves, let alone other people in which they may have impacted or hurt, right? Nobody wants to look in the mirror and feel like, wow, I was an asshole. That's just not, that's really not what anybody wants out of their life, right? Yeah. We all want to see the best in ourselves. And even when we don't, of course, that psyche kind of comes in there and eats away, but we all want to believe, that we're doing the best we can. And you are with what you have. But the lack of self-awareness, it really comes from being conditioned. It comes from being conditioned in a society that hasn't encouraged vulnerability, that hasn't encouraged understanding mental health and wellness, that has created a separation between masculine and feminine energies within the self and within our societal systems, right? It has kept you disconnected from yourself, disconnected from others, and therefore feeling like you're powerless to take care of these things in the first place. It hasn't given you any tools or techniques to care for yourself adequately enough to expose these vulnerabilities. So how can you expect somebody to be self-aware in a society, in a world that has been mirroring back fear, that has been mirroring back disconnection, that has been programming people, literally programming their subconscious, minds through mass media and all of the different ways that we tell you to be afraid of others and to discount your own power. And that all of those voices of your shadow are probably true because it keeps you working in a system that doesn't keep you connected to you.
Right.
Really.
Yeah.
You can't blame people for not having this self-awareness.
Yeah, that's very true.
You can't. And everybody will make their way in their own time. Right? It's a layering process for everyone.
It's totally layering.
Yeah, it's totally a choice. So as long as you keep, focusing on your own path and keep focusing inside and figuring out how to recollect those projections and, manage to understand and bring more nurturing to those triggers, right? In those spaces inside of yourself that feel unhealed, the more you are going to inherently heal the world, because you are raising and aligning your vibration, and that's radiating out, and it's going to give other people permission to do the same. So the brighter you shine, the more other people are going to feel permission to shine. And of course, this is going to not reflect well for everyone. Sometimes when you shine really bright, people don't know how to put their sunglasses on, and they're like, "You're blinding me, I don't like you." But
Right.
Again, you can't choose for other people, right? You can't. And eventually someone will either choose or they won't. But that's,
It's a free will thing.
Yeah,
exactly. That whole free will thing of humanity. So I'm really interested in this. So you have so much of the like human real world understanding of this, the mental health aspect and all of that. And how did you really bridge that into your spiritual practice? Because I really do believe that like psychology and spirituality should go hand in hand, to me personally. So how did you bridge that for you? Was it something that was always kind of walking hand in hand? Or did kind of one come before the other?
Yeah. So, spirituality has always been a very big thing for me. When I was younger, connection to the other side was not so much of an issue. I had experienced a lot of physical trauma and sexual trauma, mental, emotional, which made my skin sort of a war zone, and I did not feel comfortable to be in here. So it sort of shoved me into those other realms. It was very easy for me to leave my body, very easy for me to connect outside of my body and disassociate from the physical vessel itself, which, I was always, the spooky kid, let's just put it that way.
Right.
And shadow work was always, that's where I come from, right? Like some of my earliest memories, aren't exactly the most joyful things, which is okay. And so for me, they did always walk hand in hand, having to, I was diagnosed with PTSD and panic disorder. I had my first, attempt, I suppose you could say, of suicide underneath the age of 10. So, there was a lot going on there. And so psychologically speaking and spiritually speaking, those were both things that just sort of walked hand in hand for me. And it took me a very long time of being inside of that space. Darkness does not scare me. Those places don't scare me because that's how I grew up. I had to cultivate and find light through those things. And so understanding that space has made it a lot easier for me to do what I do now. It makes me motivated to do what I do now. And the spiritual pieces, for the longest time, there was a disconnection in terms of not wanting to admit a lot of the things that I was experiencing, a lot of the things that was happening were real. I really wanted to doubt myself. I really wanted to doubt what was happening, no matter how clear those things were,
Right.
So it took me a while to reunite those spaces and bridge those gaps. So, now, I think they completely belong together, and, it's just about reconciling those spaces. So for me, a big part of my shadow work was not to deny my gifts, and to also step into those more fully, and, realize that I am I'm spirit, really just expressing myself through a physical vessel that's aligned with heaven and earth, right? And that's not an easy thing to admit when you've gone through that level of trauma, and you live in a world that disconnects you from spirit and disconnects you from spirituality and tells you that those things aren't real. Luckily enough, my experiences were very impactful, for myself and others, that it's like, okay, I think the more crazy thing here would be to say that I am crazy, but yeah, so I do believe that those things belong together, and how I've adapted that into my practice now is, just through recognition. I meditate, right? I talk to my guides, I talk to angels, I have that space within myself where I connect, and when things come up, I ask for support. I know that support is available to me. I understand energy and vibration. I know that, how I resolve these things within myself will immediately reflect and magnetize back to me. I understand that. So, and that's not just spirituality, that, the spaces of vibration and how we magnetize things to us also bridge the gap into science, right? So, for me, they are two sides of the same coin. And when you can really step into the embodiment and the empowerment of yourself, you'll realize that everybody has these connections. Everybody has this capacity. This is not something unique just to me. I am nobody is, and any different than that. And it's more so a muscle that needs to be exercised and practiced. And the more you look inside of yourself, the more you'll find interesting ways that you've been hiding from yourself and denying yourself the experience of unity, right? We're here experiencing separation, and you can choose to start aligning and recollecting that projection, which is the biggest projection.
Yeah, absolutely.
Molding those two things together. So, I mean, the shadow parts are pivotally important for spiritual growth, because your shadow is you. This is not a different part of you. This is you. You can't cut off your shadow, no matter where you go. Your shadow is there, whether you see it or you don't. So it's part of you. And if you don't learn to reconcile with these pieces of yourself, then how are you ever going to actually feel whole?
And that's what people are always trying to fill, is it this void, right? There's this void, and they're trying to fill. And like you said, that false positivity. I've had people say, like, okay, so if we're not supposed to be super positive, we're supposed to be real. How does that work then? Because, you talk a lot about the positivity. It's like, it's not about like painting it over with positivity, but it's about going in and cleaning it up and replanting it with positivity, right? Like the cleanup and the, redesign and stuff. That's the shadow work. That's going in there and having the love and compassion for self, for whatever you're going to find, right? The no judgment of self.
Well, and the funny thing is again, and it's sometimes like the thing that happened is just really shitty. It's just shitty. And, and that's okay. It's okay that it is that way. But the point is to not get stuck in your stories.
Yeah.
Right? Don't get stuck in your stories. Most of us are, so busy being stuck in our previous stories and allowing them to affect the present that we forget to be present. Or we are so afraid of the stories that we've lived happening over again that we're feeling anxious about the future, right? We're feeling anxious, and we're creating these stories in our head again about what will happen if we make these moves, and then we're still not being present. But the reality is all those things that you experienced, yes, they're knowledge, they're wisdom, right? But you don't have to get stuck in them. You get to recreate every single day. Every single step you take is actually a walk of manifestation. Whether you like it or not, you are manifesting. Every single step you take is a manifestation of what you are creating. So whether you choose to do that staying in your stories, or whether you choose to do that, feeling anxious about how your stories may repeat themselves, that's up to you.
Yeah.
But you will find that if you shift and you bring love and compassion and forgiveness to those spaces, that it will create the freedom for you to realize that all that space that's being taken up in your body is completely neglecting the beauty of the fact that you get to recreate every single day, right? Through practice, consistency, and so we really rob ourselves of experience through always trying to relive the old ones, or create new ones based upon those reflections. And it's really interesting, people say, I want these things, right? They think that they don't have them or it's not available to them, but they can recall experiences of joy and happiness and all the ways that they felt good, right?
Mm-hmm.
So really it's about taking all those fragments and putting them back together to create a consistent picture of what you do want and to start training your mind to focus on that. The stories are done and gone. There's nothing you can do to change them.
Mm-hmm. There's true.
Absolutely nothing you can do to change them.
So right? Here's a question for you then. So in your experience, there's, okay, if I go back a step. So right now, through these shifting and changing times, right, on our planet and our consciousness and the communities and everything, right, everything is changing. What would you say to those that are feeling these crisis moments, feeling this anxiety? Because anxiety to me, in what I'm connecting with people, seems to be one of the biggest things. The unknown changing is producing so much anxiety. So when people find themselves caught in that anxiety energy, and they want to maybe recognize their shadow, and they're hearing what you're saying, they're thinking like, okay, yes, okay, that makes sense. What do I do? So like, what would you say? And I know it's different for everybody in a sense, but what would be your generalized thing that people can take away from this to do in those moments?
I would say the first thing is to look around at what you are giving your energy to and ask yourself, is where you're giving your energy something that you can change or not? Mm-hmm. Is it within your grasp and your control, or is it not? And start spending your energy in the places that you know you can shift and you can change, right? Mm-hmm. So that would be the first thing. You know, the anxiety about the way and state of the world, this is natural. You know, everything is it's intense out there. You know, it's really, really, you know, there's a lot of heaviness out there. And, you know, as if you believe what I believe, which is that we are all one, you're naturally going to feel that energy, right? Mm-hmm. So forgive yourself for feeling like, you know, you're not doing enough, because you are. Mm-hmm. You are. And then I would say start by just asking yourself some questions about where you give your power away. Mm-hmm. Where do you give your power away, and how can you take it back?
Right, because coming back to personal choice, right, and recognizing where that actually extends to is so powerful. Because you're right. The anxiety is when we feel like power is being pulled from us, or we don't have a say in something, but we always can shrink it down that bubble to where is it that we can have that point of power. And maybe it's right here, and you start from there and then expand it out again.
Where are the small, subtle shifts in your own environment, in your own life, that you can start making an impact and change that is in alignment with you and your highest self? Mm-hmm. And the more you start to regain control over the places in which you actually do have a say and taking control, the more sturdy and stable you will start to feel. No, you know, is this going to fix the entire world right in a moment? Of course not. Is there absolutely things out of your control, and do they deserve to make you feel really anxious? Well, of course they do. That would be silly to bypass and say, oh, just don't be anxious about it. It'll all be fine. Everything's fine. You know, it's, but, you know, if you believe also what I believe, which is in terms of manifestation and how we magnetize and how we shift our vibrations, keeping a strong picture within your mind, a strong visualization within your mind about what you want to see as a greater outcome. Mm-hmm. The more you picture the world in peace, the more you picture the world in unity, the more you take the steps at the same time, the aligned action to create that peace and unity within your own life. Mm-hmm. Naturalize a vibration. You'll be contributing to that higher good picture that will start magnetizing in on a bigger level. The more we all radiate and feel empowered within ourselves and shift that vibration out into the world, again, the more we are going to magnetize that and help other people shift into that space too. Mm-hmm. Is it an overnight fix? Of course not. Mm-hmm. And to people who are sitting there going, oh, the world is going to shit. You know, I got news for you. These things that you're seeing were always there. Now you're just seeing them. That's the only difference. The only difference is now there is light being shone in on the collective shadow. Mm-hmm. And you can't fix things that you're unaware of. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's a great point.
That's, you know, when it's like a detoxification process. You know, I tell this to my clients. You don't go into the sauna for the first time to get the clear skin and expect that you're not going to have a breakout the first few days, that you're sweating out all the toxins you don't know are underneath the surface. You're going to break out. You're probably going to hack a little bit. It's going to look a little gross. You're not going to like it. Yeah. But then you'll start to shift and you'll start to actually feel the clear skin. And this is the same thing. You cannot fix things that you are unaware of.
Yeah.
So right now we are being given a gift in awareness. And Absolutely. How that shifts and manifests will depend on the greater collective, of course, and our choices and what we make. So change what you can.
Yeah. Okay. And then, so what about, the other question I'm pondering is, so say someone recognizes they have shadow work. Okay. Maybe say they just come into the awareness and they're standing literally outside the metaphorical door to their shadow work, and they're terrified of going in. They know they have to, but they're terrified. What would you say to help someone take those steps to like opening that door instead of being afraid of it? How would you bring them in?
I would say that nervousness and excitement can often be transmutable, for one. So maybe giving yourself a little bit of permission to walk through that door with curiosity instead of defensiveness.
I love that word, curiosity. Yes.
Walk into it like you're being curious to get to know the same way that you would be to get to know another person. How can you be curious and meet yourself with curiosity in all of the ways that you've been subconsciously allowing yourself to be ruled in an unconscious way? Don't shame the things that come up. Instead of shaming them, try to understand them. Why are you here? And I bet you most of the time you'll find out that it stems from something that's just trying to keep you safe. And the environment has just changed. It is trying to keep you safe because it doesn't understand or know the new and unfamiliar territory and you're walking in. So naturally it wants to reject that and shame that and keep you safe by keeping you away from it. But if you choose to shift that perspective just a bit and say, no, I'm just curious. I'm just curious. Why do you speak to me like this? What are you doing here? Where did you come from? How can I nurture you? And always, as you're walking through that door, be curious and be willing to give yourself love.
That compassion piece is so big, hey? For self and others all the time.
Yeah. And then, too, like a good question for any of those things that pop up, are you keeping me safe still currently? Is this valid? Is this something that's actually keeping me safe? Or is this something that is now outdated, just needs some love, and is keeping me small? Those are okay questions. Just be curious and inquisitive.
Yeah, absolutely. That's beautiful. Because I think those are very simple questions to have on hand when stepping into those moments, right? Like the first one is feeling the anxiety. And then the second one is like the willingness to step in, but the trepidation of stepping in, to discovering it. And I find even in my own situations, the scariest thing is the fear, right? And so when we're running from the fear is just always there. But as soon as we stop and turn around and we look at the fear, like 9.9 times out of 10, it's really not as bad as the energy of it chasing you feels like, right? So diving into the shadow is actually, when you turn around, is going to be a little less bad than maybe what you're thinking by running from it.
Totally. It's these are imprints, right, that have been there. They're familiar imprints that have stuck inside your cells that are sitting there just trying to keep you safe. So it really is like a lot of it's just trying to keep you safe, right? Yeah. It's just trying to keep you in something that's familiar. And your mind doesn't like new things, plain and simple. It just doesn't. So you have to make those new things feel comfortable, and that takes time and consistency and curiosity, right? And also one thing I do want to say is you have a lot of people, because shadow work is trending. You got a lot of people who are blowing their shadows open, and then they're running around adding salt into their own wounds because they're not combining it with the compassion pieces and the self-care pieces. They're not actually caring for themselves in this process. So another big thing that I would say is if you are going to walk through that door, please also be aware and give yourself permission to use some tools and cultivate some tools and techniques for good self-care first. Before you walk through that door, exposing all the stuff, make sure that you know how to care for yourself.
Right.
Because that's huge. If you are just blowing these things open, and activating the cortisol and dumping your body with adrenaline, and you have absolutely no idea how to come down from that. And again, that's not your fault. Self-care. People go, why is self-care so hard? Well, you weren't taught. Again, you were not taught. How many of us had role models that actually did the thing and took regular, consistent care? And, it's just not a thing that we see modeled for us. And, especially in a society that's like, oh, you got into a car accident, you're still coming to work, right? We don't have, we haven't had that, right? Yeah. So it's okay that maybe isn't something that is familiar, but to do your best to have some practices that actually nourish you before blowing those spaces open, right? Have the proper support for yourself, and make sure, that you maybe have at least one person that you feel like you can be vulnerable enough with to call when it, comes up and it's asking to be released.
Yeah, that's a great piece of advice, is that support network, because sure, there is a willingness to do these things by yourself and look into self and all this, but like, you're so right. There's a huge value and necessity of that support team, whether it's one person, friend, a professional, many, your whole tribe. Like, I'm really glad you brought that up, because I think that's so integral.
Definitely. In the course that I teach around sacred self-care, there's a huge piece in the disconnection of tribe and community and why that's so important.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So, sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, it's an important piece is all I'm saying.
Yeah. So speaking of that, if people want to get in touch with you, what are some of the things that you offer, and how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I run a program that's called Art of Empowerment, which ART is ART, stands for Aligned Resilience Training. And it works its way through each one of the energy systems, not only in spiritual anatomy, but in the physical anatomy, and also going through from the nervous system all the way up to help realign the spirit, the body, mind, and spirit together as one, so we can start working through the shadows and integrating those pieces and helping to shift into the manifestation parts of what you want to bring in and how you want to kind of move forward. It uses NLP practices, self-care practices, meditation, energy work. Currently, my program is full, and I'm not accepting anybody until July. And there is a wait list that's already half full for that. So
great. That's excellent.
Yeah. So if you want to, I would get in touch with me sooner than later if that is something that interests you and you want to learn more about it. And then I also offer workshops around working with crystals, spirit of the crystal, bridging science and spirituality. There are different elements of resiliency training, sacred self-care, one-on-one intuitive guidance, all those kind of pieces. When the COVID is not our thing, I also do energy work in person. Right. So those are all things. Yeah. And currently I've partnered up with a friend from the Center of Wholeness and Wellness, Ryan Snow. We're working on some bigger programs as well to expand into shadow work and also into resiliency training, and doing like a full overhaul of the system, which will be available within the next couple of months.
That's fantastic. Okay. And so people can find you. Is Facebook the best, or what's the best place?
Facebook, for sure. Jade Izon. There's no other Jade Izons on Facebook, so or you can find me at my website, rootandreboot.com. So you can email me there. Yeah.
Okay, that's awesome. So I will put those links at the bottom of the post anyway, so people can direct link. But if they're listening, it's great that we can say it that way so that they can remember too. So Thank you so much for being here. This was really enlightening, and it gave some really tangible thoughts and ideas and tools for people to move through this next transition phase, kind of, I'm going to joyfully say, out of the pandemic, but how to deal with what has come up because of it. So thank you so very much.
You're most welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. And for the rest of you, thank you so much for listening today. I will post all the links to Jade, like I said. And for everything else, do join me at avalonspirit.com. We have tons of info and insights there. And yeah, I'll be back next week.